Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Software Defined Everything, the podcast for smart world systems. And today, the topic of discussion is cybersecurity for MedTech systems. Cybersecurity seems to be on everybody's minds these days when it comes to medical technology. So, to help clear up what's happening in the industry, I have two great guests today, Mike Kijewski of Medcrypt, as well as our very own Darren Porras of RTI. Let's start with some quick introductions. Mike, do you mind starting us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name is Mike Kijewski. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Medcrypt. We are a medical device cybersecurity company headquartered in San Diego, California.
Great. Darren, can you give us a little introduction as well?
Yes. So great to be here. And my name is Darren Porras. I am the Market Development Manager for Real-Time Innovations, RTI. Headquarters is Sunnyvale, California, and we provide a software technology for intelligent real-time systems.
What's the current state of medical device cybersecurity, Mike?
Yeah, so we're recording this in March of 2025, and a little over 2 years ago, the Congress in the U.S. passed a law that was the original version was called the Patch Act, which gave the FDA legal authority to assess the security posture of a medical device when it's submitted to the FDA and reject those devices that don't meet their security requirements. So we're now seeing the FDA assess every regulatory submission, looking for evidence that the device was designed with security in mind. And we're seeing something like 60 or 70% of submissions be delayed due to additional questions around cybersecurity from the FDA. And some percentage of those, which the data isn't really publicly available from the FDA, but a fair percentage of devices in the last 18 months have been outright rejected by the FDA for failing to meet their security requirements.
Darren, what's your perspective of the current state of medical device cybersecurity right now?
Yeah, I think that there's more teeth really into the review process. Obviously, the FDA has more authority now, and I think that I think Mike would have a better perspective on this than I am, but it seems that there's the perception that companies maybe don't need to pay attention to it, or maybe that they'll think it's not important, or they can get under the radar, and that's maybe is a kind of legacy way at looking at it, and that it's really to everyone's benefit to build security into these devices. But I think one of the key aspects of that is that it is as concerning as things are in terms of the current state, this push for and this need for more technologically complex and connected systems is causing even greater risk, because the innovation that they deliver is really dependent on the connectivity and the need for that to be secure as well. So that need for secure interoperability is very important, and that's highlighted actually in some of the pre-market guidance. So we'll talk more about this, about threat models and things like that, but really considering not just from a hacker point of view, but just from a risk mitigation point of view, from a considering both intended and unintended consequences. There's a lot that needs to be considered to really provide that assurance to the regulatory agencies, to hospitals, that the devices are safe and secure.
Yeah, one thing we know is that devices are getting smarter with the growing adoption of AI, robotics, data-driven technologies, and medtech. Why are we seeing these cybersecurity challenges that you just described, and how can these advancements influence the current cybersecurity landscape?
Yes, so I think Darren mentioned that some device manufacturers think that maybe the security stuff is optional. They don't really need to do it. A lot of the engineers that we work with have been building medical devices for 25 or 30 years. And they say, hey, we've never had to do this in the past. I don't think this is an issue. The hospital network is secure. But if you look at some of the most innovative medical device technologies that are out there, or the most promising technologies, things like, I was just involved in a meeting about telesurgery, where the surgeon is in a different city than the patient is, and they're using surgical robots to do the procedures. Or in diabetes, the idea of an artificial pancreas, where you've got a closed loop system between the glucose monitor and the insulin delivery system, or the use of AI to read, radiology films to diagnose patients. All of those processes are really dependent on the integrity of the data that they're ingesting. And those systems all are sending data over the public internet, right? From the hospital up to the cloud to be analyzed, or, across the internet to some other location. So like, not only have the regulatory requirements changed, but the types of things we're looking to do with medical devices and in healthcare are just so much more ambitious than they were 20 or 30 years ago, that it's really just not even a question whether or not the security of these systems is a requirement.
Yeah, just to add to that, we're seeing this technology push in healthcare. I think that's no secret. And we've seen, think about obviously surgical robots and really driving that technology push and minimally invasive therapies. But we're really just at the beginning of this, and things are only going to get more connected to deliver really therapies and ways of delivering care that we're not really can't really fathom right now. So I think that that's exciting, and I think that we're seeing that in terms of these types of systems and expanding beyond the robots into really think about like digital ORs and increasingly connected systems. And then when you combine that with the advances that in computing and AI and the algorithms that really rely on essentially it's a data fusion problem. So you've got sensors, you have applications that need to monitor alarms, that need to control the states of the system, that do that real-time processing, and not just in the cloud, actually doing that at the point of care, doing that, let's say, in the operating room, in the procedure. One way of looking at that is a lot of these intelligent and AI systems it's effectively a connectivity problem. So the challenge is there's these increasingly software-defined connected systems that historically were more like data silos, and now we're asking them to integrate, to talk to each other, to be interoperable, and also make them highly reliable and secure. So it's multiple design constraints effectively that teams have to build around. We've got lots of high-speed data, high-speed processing that needs to be also very reliable and secure, while also effectively just intrinsically increasing the attack surface with all that connectivity.
Yeah, you just mentioned connectivity. Just to make sure our listeners are on the same page, Darren, how do you define connectivity in the context of medical technology?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and I think Mike would have some really, I think, thoughts from what he's seeing as well. I think, when we talk about connectivity or think about connectivity, I think it's more than just, we're talking about things like actually physically connected. It's really about how do these applications really interoperate? And I mentioned some of those multiple design constraints before about timing and performance and security. And so this is not easy. And in addition, needing to build systems that are scalable, so that don't require, let's say, a redesign of your system if you realize maybe there's a new requirement, that maybe that exposes a new vulnerability, or maybe that in order to enable some new technology or innovation, you need a video data, maybe you need some instrument data from another device. Really, all of this is critical to the systems that are being designed today. So it's a very complex problem, really getting that data to the right place at the right time, but also make sure that data is secure.
Yeah, I think a lot of the examples that have come up in this conversation, like something like a surgical robot that's connected to the internet, that's sending data to another city, it's very clear that that's a connected system. And I think a lot of device manufacturers will say, well, if I'm not sending data to the cloud, then I'm not connected. And therefore, a lot of these security requirements don't apply. But the FDA and the regulations, that they have this term called a cyber device, and they say if your device is a cyber device, then these security requirements apply. And the definition of a cyber device is something that can be connected, not is designed to be connected. So if you have a medical device that is, a standard like Windows or Linux computer that has an Ethernet port on it, and the hospital may plug an Ethernet cable into it so that they can monitor the system or send data from the EMR, that thing's a cyber device, and therefore these security requirements apply. So it's, the vast majority of medical devices that run software, are connected, at least as defined by the FDA.
Before we dive too much into the technical side, I wanted to ask one question. Mike, are there any other factors that medtech companies should be considering beyond just the technical challenges?
Yeah, I think the cybersecurity discussion tends to focus on the technical side, like, how could somebody hack this thing? What could they do if they hack it? And those are all important considerations that I find very, interesting from a technology perspective. But there are real business implications to securing these devices that I think are maybe not immediately obvious to most medical device manufacturers. The two things that come to mind most immediately, above and beyond just getting FDA approval for your device, is number one, your customers, hospitals, have become increasingly concerned about the security of the things they're buying. So we've heard from most medical device manufacturers that the security questionnaires they get from their customers when they're part of the procurement process, like in the procurement process, are just very difficult to answer. And there's a lot of work there, and answering those questions favorably requires having thought about security when you were designing the system. So if you can't demonstrate that your device is secure, you're not going to sell the thing. The other really interesting area for security here, as a business consideration, is IP theft. So we've seen lots of cases of medical devices out in the field where some competing company or a different nation state essentially steals all your IP and copies your device and sells, a replica of your device by having access to the firmware of your device. We've also seen a lot of medical devices that rely on consumables as part of the business model. So, the customer buys a tower and the tower is sold for, relatively inexpensively. And then the hospital purchases consumable parts that are used during the procedure. And these consumable parts have little computers in them as well. There's a huge remanufacturing industry, and there's issues with competitors selling gray market consumables that plug into these devices that eat into the profit margins of the medical device manufacturers that sold the tower in the first place. So it's really not just about preventing the vice president's pacemaker from being hacked, although that's a real concern. There's just a ton of business implications to cybersecurity that are not immediately obvious.
Yeah, and I think one thing, and I want to follow up, Mike, with a question, is that I think you had talked about this earlier, is that it's about the assurance. Like you say, it may not be, okay, yes, there is a risk that, let's say, a hacker goes in and there's a patient safety issue, but it's also companies really need to provide that assurance that if there's a vulnerability or if there's a risk, how can they objectively demonstrate that they have a mitigation against that vulnerability or issue? And I think that is something that sounds like that you're seeing also.
If you think of other safety critical areas of medical device development, things like sterilization, right? Medical device manufacturers that sell something with a needle, they need to sterilize the product and they need to show that they've sterilized it. They need to document it. They need to print a lot number on the device itself, so that if it's later discovered that there is some issue with the sterility of the needle, that they can go and recall all of the devices that may not be properly sterile. Security is fairly analogous there, right? With device manufacturers obviously think that their device is secure when they sell it, but they need to track the security of that product post-release, right, in the post-market. And if there's some security vulnerability that they discover, they need to have the ability to release a software update to fix those issues in the field, or they need to demonstrate to the FDA and their customers that they've assessed that vulnerability and found that it doesn't have patient safety impact.
So as you mentioned, MedTech systems are getting smarter. They're getting more connected. They have hundreds of sensors and subsystems all working together. With all of that complexity, what does it take to keep them secure?
Yeah, so if you think about something like a surgical robot that has multiple different, as you said, sensors or components that all work together to deliver care, I think historically the assumption has been we're going to put all of these sensors and computers on their own network, and we're going to put a firewall around the network, and we're going to then assume that it's secure. And that has demonstrated to not be a comprehensive security posture, right? The FDA and other regulatory agencies in other countries, they want to see that the device was designed to operate on a hostile network. And that means that each of the endpoints needs to have security features built in. You need to be authenticating the other endpoints in the system through something like a zero trust model. And you need to ensure that those components are only talking to the other components that they should be talking to, rather than just assuming that we're going to put a firewall around the whole thing and assume that that's secure.
Yeah, I think so. I think like we've talked a bit about this before, where really with this connectivity, effectively attack surfaces are everywhere. And so you can't rely on firewalls or these network parameters when you've got all these it's about the applications, and those applications are very dynamic. And it's really about the data that's flowing across those applications. And how can you ensure that in a hostile environment, on a hostile network, that you can't trust, that you can make sure of the integrity of the data and the applications and ultimately, the functioning and system availability that needs to happen. So there's a concept called data centricity, which effectively creates a global shared data space for data in motion. And that's essentially a different concept than thinking about systems and routers and devices, where now the applications can exchange information through the data itself and not tightly coupled to applications. And so fundamentally, the data now is the interface to other applications. And now with this data centricity concept, you're able to secure the data in this shared data space with application defined policies on the data itself, which is extremely powerful. So now you can configure and specify authentication and encryption of the data in motion that is effectively independent of the transport, the location, the platform that that application may be running or using that data on. And it doesn't rely on things like firewalls or network parameters. So that's a very powerful technology and paradigm that can be applied for these types of systems, and it enables effectively access control to data in motion. And so when you think about how can you design a secure architecture that considers all these potential failure modes, potential connectivity concerns, that where you also have to consider operational state or the use case, how that application or data is used. That's a very powerful technology. And we've seen that play out in terms of the companies that we work with in terms of needing the different levels of access to information. So you can really enable least privilege and only enable applications to see the data or access the data that should have access to the data. So that's a very powerful concept.
We've talked a lot about the challenges and the opportunities in regards to MedTech, but from a leadership standpoint, what advice would you give a company designing innovative and secure systems like these, like the ones we're talking about? And what is the value of having a partnership like the one of RTI and Medcrypt, Mike?
Yeah. So first, if you're a leader at a medtech company or a healthcare software company, you really need to have somebody on your team that is dedicated to thinking about cybersecurity at each phase of the development process. Early on when the device is being designed, when there are maintenance software releases going out to the device, when you're going through the procurement process. Every medical device manufacturer should have people on staff who are responsible for thinking about the security of the product. And you really need to take a risk-based approach to looking at these security vulnerabilities. Nobody's asking for a perfectly secure medical device. Such a thing doesn't exist. And nobody is saying that cybersecurity is more important than treating patients. But the historical approach of assuming that your users, whether it's a hospital or an end user, has network controls in place that make securing your device unnecessary, those are days of the past, right? You need to see devices that were designed with security in mind that prioritize clinical functionality.
Yeah, I would agree. Ensuring that really is that you're addressing the system that's being designed with good threat modeling, building that secure by design architecture into the system early on is going to be key, because we've some of the companies we talk to, especially with the systems and the very innovative applications they're trying to build, they've mentioned we've had to actually limit functionality because we know we can't secure it, and that is definitely very unfortunate because it's limiting the access of this technology and these great things that companies are working on to get out there. So ensuring that those secure by design architectures and technologies, but also really being as efficient as possible to really focusing teams to really develop applications and leveraging these other tools and technologies to really deliver both safe and secure systems. Because I think Mike would really, probably have some very important viewpoints where this is not a one and done thing, right? And so this is really a journey. And if you can design systems where you can both innovate, you can deliver the technology needs, but also in parallel ensure that is secure and using best practices, then you're setting yourselves up really for scalable, safe and effective systems, and really in a product, throughout your product life cycles and through your product roadmaps.
As we come to the end of our conversation, I have one last question, and it's about the future of this industry of medtech. It's currently 2025. Cybersecurity is still a hot topic, and it has been for many years now. What are your predictions for this year as well as for the next 5 years?
Yeah, so we still see a number of medical device manufacturers taking sort of a wait and see approach of continuing building devices the way they have for the last 10 years and just seeing what happens from a regulatory perspective. So I think in 2025, you're going to see three or four high profile either product recalls, that there have been lawsuits between medical device manufacturers and segments of the US government around the security of these devices. I think you're going to see a bunch of device manufacturers sort of finding out how seriously the federal government is about this in 2025. That's kind of my prediction for this year. And as we think about the next 5 years, two things come to mind. Number one, the security of a device is going to become as standard a consideration as the sterility of a needle is going to be, right? There's just this problem isn't going away. It's something that's got to be addressed. And we're definitely going to, we're already making progress moving from a very sort of reactive approach to a more proactive approach of security in these products. But number two, there are real substantiated concerns about nation states around the world targeting the critical infrastructure of the US in anticipation of future global instability. There's been a lot of discussion about the security of the US's, water infrastructure, and I think we're going to see the hospital and healthcare infrastructure be a specific target for other nation states around the world, and therefore this is going to become an even more important topic than it is in 2025.
Yeah, I think we're seeing when we think about the pace of technology, that we're seeing in terms of the integration from siloed medical devices to multifunctional systems to smart devices to digital platforms and ecosystems. It's only going to continue. We're going to see that in robotics and digital operating rooms and robotic imaging systems. So the power is there, and I think that this kind of thing is actually, we're seeing this across industries, not just in healthcare, but in aerospace and autonomous vehicles and defense systems, where this increasing need for interoperability and effectively at the edge, where applying those the power of the data sources and algorithms and all of that to really deliver next generation systems and therapy. So I think that's going to continue. I think that the concern and that is a barrier is really dealing with these data silos that really need to be architected, digital first, but also with secure by design principles and technology. So I think that it's obviously a very competitive industry, and I think companies that are able to do that and deliver, I think those are really going to be the big winners.
Before we officially sign off, I'd like to offer an opportunity where folks can learn more about both Medcrypt and RTI. Mike, can you tell our listeners where they can learn a little bit more about Medcrypt and the great things you guys are doing over at Medcrypt?
Yep. So on our side, medcrypt.com, we've got a bunch of information there about our products and our services. In particular, we've got a team of just really smart folks that have come from either the FDA or large device manufacturers or other security companies who have just, a lot of really great insights about the problem. And they put on webinars, at least once a month. So I'd call your attention to some of those webinars and hear some of our very smart folks talk about the problem and what you can do to get ahead of it.
Great. Yes. And for RTI, check out rti.com. You can our solutions tab and look at the healthcare, and there's some information there about some of the different areas that these technologies are used in healthcare and medical devices, and learn more about really the cross-industry technology and how it's being applied in all these exciting areas today.
Awesome. That wraps up this episode of Software Defined Everything. A big thanks to Mike Kijewski of Medcrypt and Darren Porras from RTI for joining us. It was great having you both on and hearing your insights. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.